this morning is about the genesis of FMD. And I can probably shed some light on who's really responsible. And it's not Marisa, it's more people like Daniele and myself. In 2004, EFCG, the European API Industry Association, went to Brussels and went to London. We met with the various DGs and we met with EMA and we said, do you realize there's some serious problems in APIs? There is a number of companies that have strategies to be deliberately non-compliant. And these people in Brussels and London looked at us and said, you must be from Mars, because there's nothing wrong in Europe. We have great products, the APIs and the drug products are checked by the QP, so, go away. We didn't. And we lobbied quite strongly. We realized that Brussels was not going to do anything. They didn't want to touch it. They just had a big scare called BSE, and the state was very safe because it was perfectly traceable to the cow. But there was very poor traceability in pharmaceuticals. So we worked quite hard, and we went to the European Parliament, and we lobbied quite strongly. And by 2006, which is 18 months before heparin, in 2006, we got more than half the European members of Parliament to sign something called the written declaration, but pretty much is like a petition where the Parliament tells the Commission, please pay attention to this. And I think that in this case, Europe was clearly ahead of the game compared to America at raising the issue that there was a problem to be dealt with. So that's where it probably comes from. It was really not from the executive side, it was from the legislative side that people came up and said, look, there's something wrong here. And this is why I'm particularly happy to have Marisa Matias with us here, not only because she's Portuguese and you can see the Portuguese get things done, but so Marisa is an MEP. She has a doctorate in sociology. She's been very active at looking at problems that society has, and I think she's been very blunt at pointing out that industry doesn't always do things right. And in many aspects, I probably agree with her. But I think especially in this topic, where we have patients that swallow the murder weapon. We are very well aligned. And Marisa was the Rapporteur for the Falsified Medicines Directive. And I'll read you a definition of what a Rapporteur is. The Rapporteur reports the findings of the European Parliamentary Committee to the plenary. And in that capacity, the opinion of the Rapporteur carries a lot of weight. And if you want to influence a proposal, it is important that the Rapporteur becomes aware of your concerns. So, I think you did this between 2009 all the way to 11, and I think this became law in 12. It started being, there was this key date of July 2013. So we'd love to hear your views on what you brought to life and how it's being implemented. How do you see this?
First of all, good morning everyone. I want to thank the invitation for being here. I do apologize for arriving late, but I was in Braga, which is in the northern part of Portugal, so I have a 4-hour travel till here, and that's the reason of 10 minutes of delay. And I thank Guy because we had a lot of conversations during this process. He explained what it means to be a rapporteur. I think I can translate his explanation because the European Union has this complex system of producing legislation. So the European Parliament doesn't have the right of initiative. We don't have that right. The right of initiative is coming from the European Commission, but then is the Parliament which legislates. So, which means that at the end we have a directive or a regulation from the European Parliament together with governments, because the position of the Parliament needs to be negotiated with the position of the governments. And so when we see the directive of the European Parliament and the Council on this and this and this, basically we are working on the basis of a proposal of the Commission, of the European Commission. So every single proposal, legislative proposal, has one person responsible in the Parliament. We are 754 members of the Parliament, and there's one responsible member. And then that person is the rapporteur. We will draft the proposal of the Parliament for the legislation, but then to make it even more complicated, all the different political groups nominate a shadow rapporteur. And believe me, they are really shadows. So all the political groups nominate their shadow, and the shadow rapporteurs then amend the proposal of the rapporteur, and then we have to negotiate. At the end, we get a compromise, and at the end, with the compromise, if it is voted in the Parliament with a majority, we go and we negotiate with the governments, and at the end, we have the directive. So that's why it took almost 2 years, and it was fast, having into account the patterns. And honestly, this was one of the biggest challenges I had to face in the European Parliament, because I was arriving, I was a new member, and immediately I had to produce legislation for 500 million people from 27 different countries. I must confess I was a little bit afraid. So what was the process? And I was not the only one afraid, because I think that I met with a lot of partners, members from the organization. And I think that the first who got afraid was the industry, when they saw that the radical left-wing MEP was the rapporteur of the Parliament for this issue. But nevertheless, we at the end we went very well together. So the process is that one, as I explained. And what was the issue? Let us say. First, it took 2 months to change the legal basis of the proposal. The European Commission said that we needed to legislate on falsified medicines in order to avoid the entrance in the supply chain of the falsified medicines. The Commission wanted to legislate based on the internal market legal basis. So it took 2 months to get the majority of the Parliament and force to add to the internal market the public health legal basis. Because the legal basis will define at the end what we can do in terms of proposal or not. Secondly, it would be needed to take into account the dimension of the problem. And so I needed to make an assessment and an evaluation of what was the real situation in Europe. And we are talking about one of the regions where we have 1% of falsified medicines identified. But that meant, by the time, 2.7 million medicinal products which were found at the EU custom borders in 2006, 2.5 million in 2007, and in general an increase of 384% when compared to 2005. Then we saw also there was this trend from the falsification of lifestyle medicines to life-saving medicines, and a trend towards targeting the classical supply chain. So this was more or less general approach. What I did before drafting the proposal was to have meetings. I had hundreds of meetings with all the kinds of actors with the industry, the transporters, with the patient organizations, with professionals, and also to make a lot of fieldwork visits to the different actors in the legal chain of supply in order to identify in the terrain, in the field, how was the process, and in different countries, because we have also 27 different, not 28, but at the time 27 different legal bases to add to the European legal basis. Saying this and going directly to the issues, what were the main discussions? So we had to discuss about the scope of the directive. And my proposal was to have a clear distinction between prescription medicines and over-the-counter, taking into account the different risks that they represent to public health and taking into account a cost-effective model at the end. Another thing had to do with the very own definition, because the Commission proposal didn't present any kind of definition of what stands for falsified medicine, API, excipient, nothing. There's no definition. So I propose to create a definition of falsified medicine based on the identity, on the source, and or in the ingredients and or components, because we need to make a distinction between falsified medicines and medicines which could have problems based on errors of manufacturing or quality defects and things like that, because otherwise it would be a nightmare at the end. Another thing was how to proceed concerning the inspections, and this was a huge debate. I was in favor of mandatory inspections. I changed my mind during the process. I think we all learned, and I learned a lot during this process. But initially I was in favor of mandatory inspections till I got the idea that we would have enough European Union citizens to make it. But okay, that was my initial proposal. At the end we got a different kind of approach based on international cooperation, based on the good manufacturing practices and things like that, so I'm not going to explain to you. I'm not going to pray to the priestess, you know better than I, so I'm not going to say that. Another thing which the Commission did include, and I included in the proposal, was to have sanctions. The model, since, as I understand it, falsifying medicines is not properly a regular activity, so we need to have proper sanctions to this type of activity. The model I proposed was to find a way of equivalent sanction system as for the narcotics infringements, for instance. This was totally refused by the governments when negotiating. The European Commission didn't want sanctions, the governments didn't want sanctions equivalent to narcotics infringements, so at the end we came to a compromise, and that's what is in the directive, and at the end is that every member state, every country will find an equivalent, how do you say, fine?
Fine.
Fine, yes, it's fine. An equivalent fine, and then every member state will apply an appropriate sanction concerning what is but okay, I think that was a little bit a kind of a defeat of the Parliament, but we can talk about it. Then, what is the legal chain of supply? I decided to include not only what was included in the Commission proposal, because not all the actors are producers or wholesale distributors, but also to include traders and brokers, and also to include internet sales, and that was a nightmare. That was a mess, because as internet sales are not legal in several member states, it was used to address the fact that it was not in the legal chain of supply. Nevertheless, it is legal in some of the member states, so it was a huge discussion, but internet sales were included as well. at the end. And then there were huge debates about authentication and tracing, about data protection, about parallel trading. It was a huge, huge debate. Parallel trading was included in the proposal. That was my initial proposal, and I had a lot of enemies based on that, including the parallel trading. But it was included in the proposal at the end, and I can explain why, but I don't want to take all the time. And then another thing which was included and it was not included was to consider also not only imports but also exports from EU to third countries. Even that European institutions say that's not a problem, we do everything okay and well, I think that legislation should incorporate not only what we know but what we don't know, and we cannot accept anything but reciprocity. So if we are willing to make inspections and controls concerning imports, we should be willing to control also the exports. And there are a lot of other things. It was a huge fun, but I don't want to take all the time. I'm so sorry, I speak too much.
No, we're fascinated. Keep going.
No, but I want to have some dialogue. So
Okay,
if you want
let's
to
have some dialogue. Please, I think Marisa would love some questions from you.
My name is Matias from RKGA in Germany. I have a question, you just mentioned it, but only, let's say, partially, is the question of the excipients. In the False Medicines Directive, you have only the link to the documented risk assessment, but let's say what is still missing also, if you read in the respective guideline, is any kind of clear reference to potential standards. I can mention, there had been a long discussion after the so-called certain excipients directive and public hearing. Could you highlight a little bit why you're approaching this direction now?
Thank you very much. In my initial proposal, I not only wanted to have mandatory inspections, as I wanted also to include excipients. So not only the medicines, the APIs, but also the excipients. And I collected a lot of data in order to justify that we needed to include excipients, but I was alone. And that was one of the things which was lost. So on the excipients at the end, and especially because the major parliamentary groups didn't want to, and I'm part of a group of 34 MEPs and 754, so I have to negotiate a lot in order to have 400 supporters. But excipients was one of the things that was linked then to the risk assessment and things like that, but not included as a part. And it was totally impossible to include it. I would say that excipients was one of the most difficult discussions we had throughout the process. But there's just a minor reference and is not included in the scope of the directive.
Sorry for my question. Imagine a scenario, even if you have all the researchers enough to perform all the inspections you want, you must realize that the inspection process is only a macro analysis of the company and the products, because it's not a 100% overview of everything. It's impossible because we have limits, we are humans. So I think it's better approach to have risk assessment when you target whatever you want, because it's impossible to reach 100% from my point of view. It's impossible. I think it's not in the real world. And nowadays with all the technology advanced and all these things, I think it's...
I couldn't agree more, but I said I changed my mind during the process, because there are a lot of things that I was learning throughout the process. That was one of the things. So it was the first thing I said when I was talking about inspections. I put in the proposal, so if you find it is true, that we should have mandatory inspections. But throughout the process and talking with people and with the different actors and with the capacities, that's why I said even I realized that not even the 500 million citizens of the European Union would be enough to control everything. And so I couldn't agree more, but that's not in the proposal.
Thank you very much for that presentation. That was really enlightening in our understanding. Just to build on what Elena has said, inspections do have a role, but I think probably more important, and you're to be commended on this, I think in terms of the directive, is that it puts a particular additional focus on the regulatory authorities from the countries of origin. And I believe that in terms of inspection, we can actually achieve a great deal more by getting the countries that are supplying the products to do their job in terms of regulating their own industry better. And I think the directive encourages that, so thank you for that.
Completely, yeah. At the end, that's the outcome.
We have the Falsified Medicine Directive now. What's next?
The Falsified Medicine Directive is not totally implemented because issues concerning with audits and inspections and other issues were negotiated through what is called in the European jargon delegated acts, which means that the European Commission, together with the European agency, together with the national authorities, will find, not only that, also, for instance, the safety feature issues. So at this moment, we are still in the phase that through the delegated acts, the Commission, together with the national authorities and the EMA, are trying to find a common proposal, or at least an equivalent proposal. So what is at stake, in fact next week I'll have a meeting with the Council on that respect. What is at stake is that the Parliament has all the time the capacity to evaluate if it is in line with what was approved or not. So if something is not in line with what was approved, or if there's a huge change, we can always bring it to the Parliament again and force a vote on that specific issue. So the period for implementation is 5 years. It was approved in 2011. We still have to wait till 2016, and then it's supposed to have the full implementation. But we have a lot of things to do. The Falsified Medicines Directive was included in a pharma package, which included also pharmacovigilance and the patient information to the patient information, information to patients. Yeah, direct. And there were a lot of things which were at the end were out of the initial proposal because it was highly controversial. And we still have a lot of things to do. For instance, one of the things which we didn't dealt with within the Falsified Medicines Directive, and I think we should look at it, was IPR or patent rights issues, and we didn't deal with it. And it was partially because we shouldn't do it would mess up all the things, and also to avoid a discussion which could be taken for 10 or more years and we wouldn't get to any kind of compromise or common position. So for instance, I think that at this level, we need to concentrate in IPR and patent rights issues, but other things that we need to do. At the level of public health, everything is to be done. I was just giving examples, but concerning public health, we still almost everything to be done, because public health is just a responsibility of European institutions since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, which means since 2010. Yeah. December 2009. So we started to deal with some issues that we couldn't deal before. And there are a lot of things we can put in common, because there are a lot of proposals from the Parliament, but they have no binding power whatsoever. So there's a lot of work to do. But in this domain, I would say that to fulfill the original pharma package would be a goal to keep, and also to avoid the difficult discussions on IPR and patent rights and other things. Some of them just.
Hi, I'm Lynn Myers, I work for Novartis, and I was on the FPA group, which, if you like, were one of your shadows. And, I think I remember reading some of the documents that you wrote as the rapporteur, and they were incredibly complicated. You were looking at quite a complicated area. And I'm sure that the different actors, as the shadows, had quite different views on what should or shouldn't be in the legislation. How did you balance that, and how did you work out what was the right thing for public health?
I presented the proposal, and then just to get the compromise within the Parliament, it took 6 months. Because my initial proposal received, I don't remember, but about 700 amendments, something like that, 795 amendments, something like that. So the first task was to study all the amendments and to propose compromises, and I was able to generate 15 compromises which would replace the 795 amendments. How to manage that? For instance, to say we need to include internet, and I will not sit on that, and I can negotiate on excipients if then we have a different legislation on that purpose, because that's one of the things I didn't say before. I'm so sorry, because I understand that we can deal with it in a different stage, at a different level, because excipients have not only to do with medicines, and that was always the thing which was brought to the scene. When I said we need to include excipients, no, for God's sake, we are going to include all the trading system in the entire world. We have no capacity. We cannot deal with excipients because it's not like API. So it's something which is much more broader, so we cannot deal with it. And I said, okay, then we can propose to have a different proposal on excipients, not just devoted. And honestly, there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies saying, exclude it, please, because we will be the ones with more penalties for that if it is only devoted to medicinal products and not to, and all the other things are out. But we have a lot of excipients which are used for medicines and for other things. So that was the issue. That was one of the kind of negotiations which was dealt with. At the end, I must confess, I was not expecting, but at the end, the compromises were not far from, and for instance, the inspection things. It was surprising for me because sometimes the associations can appear where you don't expect to appear. So I'm from the United Left Wing, and the other parliamentary group who wanted to have mandatory inspections was the EPP, the European Popular Party, the major group in the parliament. So then there was this, okay, we have the major parliamentary group with one of the smallest, but nevertheless we can find a majority here. And then I changed my mind, and then I had to convince them to change their mind as well. So, but they were very happy, and that we had some things in common. But honestly, it's a huge effort mainly to try to find a balanced proposal, because at the end, if we don't find compromises, the proposal is a nightmare. And you can find inside the proposal a statement and the opposite statement. If you couldn't find a compromise. So that was the major work, but with things like that, said, okay, I relieve the inspections. You are right, I was wrong, but I don't relieve the legal basis on public health or the definition of falsified medicines in order to not confuse with manufacturing errors, things like that. And then we can work on excipients in a different basis, because I agree that we have a broader thing to deal with, but it's honestly, it took 6 months, these compromises, and then it took 9 months to negotiate them with the council.
I can give you more interesting background to this issue about mandatory inspections. And it sounds like the Rapporteur changed her mind because the information was there would be something like 10,000 API producing establishments that would have to be inspected. And that data was provided to the Rapporteur by the European Commission. We know exactly where it came from, and it came from some consultant in the UK, and the data is completely wrong. and EFCG gave the correct data to the Commission, and they filed it. And the correct data was that there's probably 700 to 1,000 establishments that are adequate to supply the US pharmacies and get inspected by the Americans. So we took a view, Europe would be a little bit more than that. And I think the data Gerald showed this morning that 1,600 sites are being given written confirmations. And I think those 1,600 sites, if they were to be inspected, would go down to a bit more than half. So if you had received the data that the sites would be less than 1,000, what would you have done?
No, but we have talked about that before, and when there was this contradiction about the data, but nevertheless, then it was not only the number of the places to make the inspections, it was also what was the scope of the inspection, and also in terms of international cooperation, what was the basis of the trust or of the good manufacturing practices and things like that. So at the end I changed really my mind independently from the figures, because I think that we cannot have double standards, and we should work based on trust as well and based in international cooperation.
I think the industry couldn't agree with you more. However, you have some people that break the rules, break the law, and cheat. And what industry wanted from mandatory inspections was not to inspect 100%. What we wanted was to create an atmosphere that you could potentially be inspected with a high probability.
But there's a central issue, because it was kept that from time to time it will work in that basis by a sample, but from time to time and not on a regular basis.
Okay, because, and I was delighted when I heard you say, I want tough sanctions, because what you need is deterrence. Bad producers, gangsters, have to be under a high probability of being caught, plus that the penalty is tougher than the benefit. And I'm afraid we don't have that yet in Europe. We do not have precedents of people being put in jail. And until you have CEOs in jail, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, but nevertheless, don't tell me, I know that. I'm from Leicester. And I work also in financial markets. But nevertheless, all member states will need to implement a penalty and a sanction, a concrete sanction. And that was one of the toughest things to negotiate, as I said, because it was not very easy to convince neither inside the Parliament nor the Council because it takes too much work to find it and to apply it and it was not that like I wanted to be, but everyone will have, and they have to be more or less equivalent to all member states. So it's not equivalent to narcotics, but it will imply at the end, as a crime, it could imply at the end jail penalty or something like that, because the definition of crime is there.
Good. One last question?
I was interested in one topic when I saw, in some cases, counterfeit materials. When I saw some counterfeit materials, it was in a lot of cases combined with doping, illegal doping and topics like that. So I just wonder, you talk about that you try to combine it with narcotica and this somehow failed. But why not combining with some other aspects like, for example, doping? When you look at internet topics, when you go to these web pages, they are in a lot of cases combined. Doping not only for athletics as well in a broader sense, and there you find a lot of coincidence of these producers.
Yeah, for sure. But the narcotics was to find in the legal basis of the different countries something that could be applied as a model for the sanctions, not in any other aspect. But narcotic, the doping is also included in the scope at the end, as it was defined, because we have this risk assessment for over the counter. We have the different kinds of applications for prescription medicines, but there's also the entire issue of customs and border control and legal chain supply control and all the things within the internal market, which in fact can favor the identification of other problems like doping, for instance, and other issues which are not directly covered by the scope of the directive. But we have talked, and I've talked with authorities also, because of doping, but not only doping, there are a lot of activities which can benefit for the traceability system and from the assessment, evaluation, and information which will be provided when implemented the Falsified Medicines Directive. That is not in the scope because then we could not fit it, but a lot of things I think are more or less covered without being explicitly covered, because then it has to do with the authorities and how they will proceed with inspections inside the European Union, the traceability system and things like that. So it's not the same, but we can cover other areas as well.
I think we're a bit late, although I think for lots of people that are in industry, this perspective from what happened at the Parliament is quite fascinating. And I think that when it came to vote, this was near unanimous.
Yes, which is
So
strange.
congratulations. I think...
No, it's not, I'm joking. No, it was at the end, it's always a collective work, because we need, the big parliamentary groups don't need to negotiate as much, because they got majority only with 2 groups, but when we come from small groups, we have to negotiate more, but I think at the end of the proposal, and it's more sounded than if it is just without taking time to negotiate, and it becomes more collective work rather than other things. Of course, there's a need for a lot of patience and pressure and not giving up, but at the end it's more collective, I think, when it's in that way, rather than, that's why it was almost unanimous, because we were able to negotiate.
Good. I personally think that, I mean, FMD is clearly another Lego piece in building a safer supply chain and reducing the risk to patient. I also changed my mind in that what the EU has done of forcing a true dialogue between regulators globally is a major innovation. And it's the only way we're going to make sure globalization is mostly good rather than having bad aspects to it. And I think we are late for lunch, so I will probably close in giving my thanks to the speakers and in pointing out that RX 360 does embrace everybody, including radical left-wing politicians. and this is not the first time. We also welcome radical NGOs that are somewhat critical of some aspects. But I think it's great. We get lots of perspective.
What was the irony? That we have this peer voting system for giving prizes to MEPs in different areas, and it's a secret vote. And against all the odds, I won the prize of best MEP in the health domain, and it was a prize from EPFIA. I cannot show this to my comrades. Okay, anyway. They are very aware of it. But it depends on the subject. I'm also the rapporteur of the European Parliament for the evaluation and assessment of the European Central Bank activities. And in that case, I'm not so very well successful as in the falsified medicines or in Alzheimer's. So it depends on the issue. Okay, but thank you very much.
Marisa, thank you.
If you have any doubts, our contacts are public. We still can interfere in the directive implementation in 2016. So if you have concerns, worries, things that you think that are not in line, but should work, we can always bring it again to the Parliament. And I'm willing to help in what I can do, because you are the bosses, I'm the one in charge. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marisa. So we have lunch now, and if we could be back here